is connected also to the surface water. So we cannot check actually are we doing a good job. You can check it technically. You can check the membranes by putting air on it. If it keeps its pressure, then we know the membrane is good. If not, then we know there is a problem with the membrane. So that are some things you have to you learn by doing. User results, they're satisfied and they appreciate the service pretty much. We have an average use of 7.2 times per day, which is the average of 2 times per week in the Marina. Using the app seems to be complicated. As our supplier, they have to work on it. There's a limited app use, and the app use is discharging bilge water, but the impact of the app use is rather high. And then what's next? What can we do more? The problems on the islands are remaining maybe more or less the same. So people do not enter the toilet, although it is easily accessible from the island. So maybe we have to stop now. It's the last slide. What can we do with the surplus of energy? Can we integrate more in the water sport? Can we integrate into the water sport app? So that are the things we will do for 2019. And in 2020, I hope to present the final results. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rumer. Excellent presentation and food for thought. I can see many applications for what you have developed on Ireland's waterways, certainly, both in the public sector and in the private, and you present a new opportunity for effluent treatment. Our next speaker will be Dr. Paula Tracy, who is from Dublin, Ireland, and is the Senior Environment Officer for Waterways Ireland. Her key responsibilities include the formulation of Waterways Ireland's policy on environment and heritage issues. Paula has a PhD in environmental sciences, a BE in civil engineering, and over 20 years of professional experience in the area of environmental protection, having worked on environmental programs within the United States for the US EPA. Paula, we look forward to your presentation.
Hi. Thanks a lot for that, Joe. And as Joe says, I am a civil engineer and I'm also an environmental scientist. So some people think that I'm a bit schizophrenic, but I have multiple identities, obviously. And so too do our canals. And that's what we've been hearing about in the last few days, about the variety of different identities that the canals have and the changes that they've gone through in terms of regeneration over, the hundreds of years that they've been in place, thousands of years in the case of the Chinese. So one of the primary identities is that historical industrial heritage value that they have, which is huge and totally primary. The canals were built as transport corridors, obviously, initially, and they were driven by commerce. So they were conduits, basically, to bring goods from one place to the other. And over the years, and currently, obviously, they've become these green linear parkways, parks throughout the landscape. And this is a picture of the Grand Canal, and it's running through pastoral country there in the urban countryside. This is a picture just outside Tullamore, obviously the Grand Canal again, coming through that magnificent bogland countryside there. And moving right into our urban centres. This is the Royal Canal. John McKeown gave a couple of pictures of the Royal Canal here at this precise location, right adjacent to the jail that's just beside the Whitworth Road in the heart of Dublin, Mountjoy Jail. And there you see the wonderful heritage boats moving up through the canal there, and really bringing the urban centre there alive in the heart of Dublin. And again, this is in the urban context, beautiful canals right in the heart of the city, really important green corridors in the city. But if you ask any boat person, whether they're male or female, you know, what is the essence of the canal, or what draws you to the canal, or what's wonderful about the canal, you know, they're hardly going to say, you know, well, it's a trapezoidal channel which was designed for, you know, movement of boats, because there's something else there, obviously. And in a holistic way, when we think about it, you know, the element of environment is very, very rich and very important in canals. And I've been listening as well to different speeches and different talks, and Heather Clark from British Waterways gave a great talk earlier today, and she was talking about how some of the reasons people living very close to canals don't go visit canals, partly is because of environmental quality, and the fact that they think or perceive that they don't have good environmental quality. So these are really important canals, and in you know, typical Irish fashion, of course, two of our great poets have tried to encapsulate that whole essence of what the canal is. And our minister on the first day, Minister Josepha Madigan, she did cite Seamus Heaney as one of our most famous poets, poet laureate, and his last poem, written just before his death, was about the canals, and she quoted it in Irish, Oscuelga, and I'm not sure if too many understood what she was saying in the room. So here's one of, this is just a little piece from that poem in English, where he tries to put into context the essence of canal, and he says, say canal, and there's that final vowel, towing silence with it, slowing time to a walking pace. The grassy zest of verges, the path not narrow but still straight, where soul could mind itself or stray beyond. And that's a beautiful picture there again of the Grand Canal, going right out into the distance and encapsulating that sense of the essence of the canal. And the other poet that is not as well known is the poet Patrick Kavanagh, and he's totally associated with the canals in Dublin, specifically the Grand Canal in Dublin. And he wrote a seminal poem about the canals, and he talked about, oh, commemorate me where there is water, canal water preferably, so stilly, greeny at the heart of summer. And he was commemorated, and people come sit by the canal and take in all that wonderful greenness. So part of this whole essence of canal is undeniably the environment. And we know that the canals, specifically our Irish canals, are really important conservation and natural heritage areas. But in order for us to protect that, and it's really important as ourselves to protect that and to ensure the continuance of the canals, we have to understand where we are. And often we don't understand just how important ecology is within the canal system. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in this presentation. So just to put it in context, we have a canal cross-section here, and here's all the elements of which form the ecology, or which are important to the ecology. So first of all, you have water quality, which is huge. The very source of the canal itself is absolutely primary to what kind of ecology can exist there. And that water quality supports plants, supports fish, supports the very essence of the canal itself. We've got lamprey, crayfish, all in the sediments there, living and thriving in Irish canals. Lamprey and crayfish are both protected species in a European context. And we've got birds living in those riparian edges, the reed fringes, otters, fish, invertebrates, the bugs that the fish live on, and kingfishers travelling up and down those corridors. And then the towpaths themselves, we've got really important grassland habitats, orchids in different parts of our canals and the Grand Canal. And then we have birds, mammals living in those lovely hedgerows that are, you know, running down the edge of each canals, and birds and bats in the trees. And in the back drains, we've got newts and frogs. So we have a whole myriad of different living organisms that are you know, right in the heart of our canals. So in terms of the European Water Framework Directive, this is a seminal piece of legislation which the European community brought out to try to protect our waterways, and particularly the ecological value of those waterways. And the directive itself, not only does it look at water quality in terms of the physico-chemical parameters of water quality, but it also looks at the quality of the biological community and the quality of the actual shape of our waterways and the hydrology as well. So under the Water Framework Directive, basically, the whole objective of the Water Framework Directive is to achieve good ecological status for our rivers and our lakes, and good ecological potential for canals. And that's a combination of making sure we have a quality biological community, that's all the plants and the bugs, and good hydromorphological characteristics. That's all to do with the shape of canals, or the shape of canals and rivers. So for example, with fish, you need ripples, you need fast-flowing areas, you need other areas where you can have spawning carrying out. So the shape of the rivers are all very important. And the physicochemical characteristics, that's all about the chemistry of the water column and whether or not you've got nutrients and whether or not you've got enough oxygen there to support life. So with regards to Irish canals, we basically took part with British Waterways and Scottish Waterways and the Environment Agency to develop a particular tool so we could literally assess whether or not our canals were compliant in terms of the Water Framework Directive. And we developed a tool, and the author is Nigel Wilby. He did an awful lot of work on this. And basically what they did is they looked at canals in Scotland and Britain and in Ireland, and they developed what we consider to be an idealised canal system from an ecological point of view. So we had this basically, so what would be aspired to in terms of what would be a good quality canal. Of course, it's different from a river because a canal is an artificial water body, and most importantly, had to take into account boats because they are built for boats. And so it's not, in terms of this kind of tool and how we assess ecology, we always take into consideration the boat movements that run through the canals. So just to explain what that tool does is, so it's a biostatistical canal classification tool, and what it does is basically compare the actual ecological condition to the expected ecological potential that we would like. And so what does that mean? Basically, you collect all this data in terms of the water column, the health of that, the health of the bug community, the health of the plant community, and hydromorphological data. And you look at that and you assess whether or not that meets the objectives that you would hope it would do. And so therefore the outputs can be good, moderate, poor, bad. And they influence the ongoing management of the canals in Ireland. I'll be talking a little bit about that later and giving you some actual examples. So you've seen this slide several times. And just to say that Waterways Ireland manages a plethora of different types of waterways, about rivers and lakes and canals. But in terms of Water Framework Directive, we're only responsible for monitoring the canals for the Environmental Protection Agency. So here's the Royal and the Grand Canal, and a little bit of the Shannon Errant Waterway as well. And these are our monitoring sites all through the canals. There's about 40 or so, 40 plus monitoring sites throughout the canals. We carry out water quality sampling 4 times a year at all of these different sites along our canals. And we basically, look at a whole load of different elements like ammonia, BOD, all these different parameters that are necessary to assess the quality of the water column. What's interesting here as well is that this particular value here, this SRP, is basically about bioavailable phosphorus. And for British canals, the level is much higher. You can see it there on the left-hand side. There's a much higher value for British canals because they are a little bit more polluted in the sense than Irish canals. We have a much lower level and limit value for phosphorus because our canals are of very high water quality, particularly when it comes to phosphorus. So therefore, we don't use the same value. We use our own value to ensure that we're not, we're making sure that the standard is high enough for us to protect our canals in their particular context. So we also, in that 4 times a year, well, this is looking at macroinvertebrates, and this is actually done once every year, whatever. We're basically collecting samples of the bug community, and we're looking at those bugs and analysing them and see what kind of bugs they are. Now, this slide is just for all you ecologists in the room. I'm sure there's tons of you out there. But basically, it's just to say that there's a variety of metrics that we look at. So we're looking at the bugs and we're seeing if they're pollution tolerant or pollution intolerant. That gives us an idea of whether or not the canal water body is supporting a good community of bugs. And the important thing to say is that ultimately we're calculating a particular index where we're looking at observed value over expected value, and that gives us a value to be able to rate the macroinvertebrate community, the bug community. Then we look at plants. We look at plants every year along all the different sites, and we're looking at the health of the plant community, which is really important. Again, this slide is just to say there's a variety of different metrics we're looking at to score the quality of those plants and to say how good they are. And overall, basically what we're doing is we're looking at all those different elements, the water, the plants, the bugs, the hydromorphology. We're scoring them. But the most important thing here is there's a one out, all out rule. So if two of them are good and one of them is bad, well, then we have to go for the bad. And that's the way we rate it. So all of those elements are looked at together, and we then classify the canal based on how good they all are. So here's the good news in terms of Waterways Ireland's canals. We have a lot of really good, most of our canals are at good ecological potential. And that's really important, and it's based on the quality of the sources that that are feeding both the Royal and the Grand Canal. We have a few moderates in there, and we have some ongoing issues, whatever, which we have to deal with. But overall, in general, our canals are pretty good. And there's just a diagram so that you can see that a bit more visually. So in terms of the green there, canals are doing pretty good. We do have some issues, whatever. You can compare that to some of the feeders and drains. These are some of the drains that are discharging into our canals, and we monitor those as well. A lot of those have some problems, and so you can see, so it's very important for us to check that and to try to deal with some of those problems. And under the Water Framework Directive, you also have a whole load of programme of measures where you're trying to, if you come up with a particular problem or a pressure, you're trying to remove that and bring back and restore the ecological quality. So all of this information is presented in reports every year. We have lots of this information and lots of reports. We're very happy to share that. We report this information to Europe. So in terms of what does this mean for our canals? What does this mean in terms of managing our canals, in terms of maintenance and capital works? So first example is just to look at Grand Canal Basin. Wonderful day back in 1796 when the Grand Canal Basin opened. And by the 1920s, it had kind of become a wasteland. If Ireland had an industrial revolution at all, it probably took place at the heart of the city here, and all of the chemical waste was basically deposited in areas here. We had the gas works, so basically had sort of an industrial wasteland at this point in terms of the basin. In the 1980s, that was still the situation, but you can see as a kind of cultural magnet, the canal still brought. Here we have U2 when they were, basically boys who used the backdrop of the basin for their U2 October album. So they saw something at that point, obviously, in terms of the draw of that waterway. Nowadays, this is what we have in terms of Grand Canal Basin. There has been tremendous development around it. It's beautiful. It's in a beautiful part of the city. We have the Google building here. We have basically a fabulous Grand Canal Theatre, which is a powerful presence within that whole area. But the most important thing, from my perspective, is that water body is fed by a pristine fen. So the water quality is actually superb, really, really good water quality in that basin. It's a tremendous opportunity for sports and recreation activity. But unfortunately, we have a problem because we have a surface water discharge point coming right into our basin, and it's fed by a combined sewer overflow. So that means that we get a lot of intermittent poor water quality. So with Water Framework Directive, we've been monitoring that basin on an ongoing basis. We know we have this problem, and we've been trying to deal with that. We have worked with the Dublin City Council and Irish Water and trying to resolve this because we want to move that pipe out of there. And in terms of the objectives of the Water Framework Directive, to re-establish the water quality there so we can have recreation activity. There's a couple of local lads that love jumping in, and basically, if we restore that water quality completely, we can actually establish a whole blue playground in the centre of the city. So here's a pretty dirty picture, which engineers love, but it's actually quite a beautiful dirty picture too to environmentalists, and the reason is because of that lovely reed fringe there. This is a dredging activity, and so in terms of maintenance activities, what we're doing here, why that's important is because we're pushing the dredging is being carried out in the centre channel, and we're keeping that nice reed fringe. And the importance there is we're keeping all the bugs and insects that are important to keeping that reed fringe. So that's basically a dredging process that is being environmentally benign. So you can see out of that dredging, our nice reed fringe is coming back, and that's all lovely. And all those macroinvertebrate species are coming back, and that's great too. And the picture just there on the right with the hand is like a protected snail, actually, which is very, very sensitive to turbid conditions, but exists in the Grand Canal in Dublin. So there we see those nice reed banks. In terms of, we also do a lot of aquatic weed control on our canals, But again, our guys are careful not to impinge on the reed area, sometimes anyway, sometimes they get in a bit of trouble. But, and it's all to protect these lovely reed and fringe edges. We've actually done habitat surveys along our canals, and we actually have a grassland management plan for orchids on the Royal Canal, or in the Grand Canal, because they grow there. We also, the Grand Canal and the Royal Canal are also coarse fisheries of national importance. Tremendous amount of fishing goes on and angling, and very important for that reason. So therefore we have to electrofish and take care of them any time. So for instance, this particular electrofishing was carried out and this pike was moved from, that was the Royal Canal during dredging activity. We also have a couple of protected species on our canals that we mentioned earlier. The image on the left is a protected plant, Greenlandia densa, and what we do is we actually transplant those plants from the canal when we're dredging. So we protect them, we bring them back in again. What we've actually found is that dredging actually stimulates the seed bed, and actually this plant actually thrives with dredging in our canals. We're still trying to, make that point to the regulators. And on the right-hand side is crayfish, and we have multiple numbers of crayfish. That's a protected species in our canals. Well, we also have a few nasties. This is another issue where, again, we've come across creosote. There was an old creosote coating railway yard right beside the canal there, and as a consequence, we have some creosote in our canals, and that's something we have to take care about. Again, in a Water Framework Directive context, you can monitor for some of the nasty chemicals. That's part of Water Framework Directive. In this case, we look at phenol in the water column to see if there's any impact in the water column from those contaminated sediments, but we'll have to come up with a long-term plan for dealing with them. We engage in a lot of research and partnership with regard to our canals, and we've done that with several different universities, particularly in the area of invasive species. So I'm going to close there and just say that, certainly our canals, they were built initially for boats. That is the primary function of them, and it certainly is something that is taken into consideration in terms of our fulfilling our Water Framework Directive objectives. And one of the important things there is, you see, with canals, with the canal ecology, we need clear water. So, and when weed comes in, one of the most important things that boats do is they cut down that weed in the centre channel for us, whatever. And so boats, in a sense, are, an intrinsic part of ensuring the health of the canals are maintained. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Dr. Paula, the canal, the patient looks to be in good health, in rude good health, and in good hands. So I'd like to acknowledge all the work that you and your team do in keeping all of our waterways healthy and in good order, and keeping us right and saving us from making those classic mistakes that the engineering teams can do. But anyway, Matthew Kennedy is our next speaker. Matthew has been a member of the Royal Canal Amenity Group, formed in 1974. Matthew's been there since the early 1980s and was very involved in the canal restoration programme, particularly on the Leak Slip Maynooth and Kilcock stretch of the canal. Matthew took over as chairman in 2013 at a time when the group moved from restoration to promoting the recreational, heritage and educational potential of the Royal Canal. Matthew is a retired marine engineer, and he holds a master's degree in military history. Matthew, you're very welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm kind of the interloper here. I was supposed to be on early this morning on the restoration, but I got moved. So aside from that, I want to talk about the Royal Canal and its restoration. This presentation will look at how a derelict waterway, Ireland's Royal Canal, was saved from destruction, and its subsequent restoration was spearheaded by a community-based voluntary organisation, the Royal Canal Amenity Group. It was also showed that the canal's full restoration and ongoing development was made possible by the close cooperation between the voluntary group, and the Office on Public Works / Waterways Ireland. And I think everybody's seen a map of the canal, and here's another one just to remind you what it's like. The Royal Canal runs 145 kilometres from the River Liffey in Dublin to the River Shannon in County Longford, with an 8-kilometre branch line running into Longford town. It has 46 sets of lock gates, 5 aqueducts, and its main water supply is from Lough Owl on the 25th level. Construction started in Dublin in 1790 and was completed with the River Shannon 27 years later in 1817. The canal was conceived and came to life in the middle of a late 18th century economic boom in Ireland. However, it was never a commercial success. By the time it was completed, Ireland had slipped into an economic depression, resulting in widespread unemployment and poverty, which in turn impacted on the canal's earning capacity throughout the 1820s and 30s. This was followed in the 1840s by the arrival of the Midlands Great Western Railway, which, when constructed alongside the canal, further undermined its commercial viability. In 1845, the canal was sold to that rail company, in whose ownership it remained until 1986. The fortunes of the canal continued to decline over the following years. However, during World War II, it enjoyed a brief resurgence, which saw horse-drawn barges make a return to the waterway. Nevertheless, following the war, it struggled to survive. In 1946, when Tom Rolt made his green and silver voyage, only 2 working boats were operating, but in 1951, they had ceased trading altogether. Finally, in 1961, the owners of the canal, the state-owned railway company CIE, closed it to navigation, installed a dam west of Mullingar, which in turn cut off the water supply to its western section. These are just a couple of pictures, well, 4 pictures from the canal from the time. There's a multitude of pictures showing its destruction and how it was turned into a derelict waterway. On the 40th level there, a farmer has put a low-level bridge across, and on the 38th level, a farmer has been very progressive, and he actually built a foundation for his bridge. So they all had to be removed. Anyway, over the following 15 years, towpaths became overgrown, lock gates collapsed, road bridges were replaced with culverts in counties Westmeath and Longford, and long sections of the canal dried out. As the waterway slowly became a derelict eyesore, it was suggested that it should be filled in and turned into a roadway in the Dublin area, all of which seemed to indicate that the Royal Canal as a waterway was doomed. In 1973, the Royal Canal Harbour in Clondra was reopened to the Shannon River following a 5-year restoration programme, which was carried out under a village renewal scheme. However, this work was not part of restoring navigation to the Royal, but to facilitate boating from the Shannon. By 1974, some members of the Inland Waterways Association, the IWAI, had become concerned by the state of the canal, and one in particular decided to do something about it. Dr. Ian Bath, at a meeting of the association, outlined his conviction that the Royal could be saved. Consequently, the Dublin branch of the IWAI formed a subcommittee whose task was to highlight the state of the canal and convince people, including its owner CIE, that it was worth saving. Dr. Bath followed up by organising a public meeting to discuss the possibilities of restoring stretches of the canal in the Dublin area. The meeting was attended by the IWIA members and local residents. At the meeting, an action group, the Royal Canal Amenity Group, was formed, and so in April 1974 the RCAG came to life. Following its formation, members of the group, along with volunteer work parties, began to remove rubbish from the canal and clear towpaths in the Dublin stretches. Members of the RCAG also contacted local community groups who were already involved in cleaning up projects along the canal. The groups, meanwhile, members of the RCAG also contacted local community groups who were already involved in clean-up projects along the canal. These groups subsequently formed branches and became members of the RCAG. Also around the same time, following a meeting between the RCAG and CIE, the breast gates at the 12th lock were repaired. This resulted in a 12-kilometre stretch between the 12th and 13th locks being rewatered. As news spread about the RCAG, community groups along the canal became interested in a project that might see the restoration of the canal. One such was the Abbeyshrew Development Association on the 38th level, who joined forces with Ballycargy on the 35th level to become the first group west of the canal summit to join the RCAG. Eventually, over the following years, 14 Royal Canal groups branches were formed along the length of the canal. The RCAG registered as a company in 1978, and each of the branches appointed one of their members as a director. The individual branches also proceeded to clear towpaths, repair stonework, carry out dredging work and rebuild harbours. In addition, the members lobbied county councils to replace the road culverts and the owners of the canal, CIE, to repair or replace derelict block gates. However, both campaigns met with little or no success. Looking back at the RCAG and its initial restoration work, it can be suggested that the eventual success of saving and restoring the canal resulted from the way the individual branches were set up and operated. For instance, each branch took on responsibility for cleaning and restoring their particular section of the canal. Although the parent group was not directly involved in the individual branch projects, they gave support in the form of cash injections, in addition to lobbying for political and financial support. Another advantage to this type of setup was the support the local branches got as the canal, for example, as the canal slowly came back to life in a particular area. Local communities got behind the project, not only as volunteer work parties, but to organise and give generously to fundraising events. Indeed, in some cases, branches were able to carry out work funded primarily by fundraising, topped up with donations of materials and small local county council grants. That's logo from 1978. It was the original logo. That's our new one from last year, from 2017, and that's a flyer we use to get people maybe to join us or could become involved in the canal. Not all branches were faced with major restoration work and only had to contend with the removal of rubbish from the canal and the reopening of towpaths. However, that was not always the case. For instance, the Dublin branch undertook the building of a slipway and workshop cum boathouse on the 12th level at Confey. This was part funded by Kildare County Council, with the remainder coming from fundraising projects undertaken by the RCAG. Further west, the Ballycargy Abbeyshrew branches were rewatered between the 35th and 38th levels, following a major dredging operation by the branches in that area. Work was also in progress in the Clondra area on the 45th level. This was undertaken by members of the Athlone branch of the IWAI. Indeed, from the outset and over the following years, this branch was very much involved in restoration work on the western end of the canal. They also supported the RCAG by running major fundraising events and providing work parties. A major boost to the restoration programme followed the announcement by the government that it was extending a youth training social employment scheme called ANCO to community groups who are in a position to provide work and training for young people. This resulted in RCAG branches along the length of the canal setting up schemes to carry out restoration work, in addition to provide training for the participants. The first of these projects was undertaken by the Dublin branch, who leased premises for a nominal rent from Guinness's to manufacture lock gates. Following a fundraising campaign and timber supplied free of charge from a timber merchant, the lockgate factory went into production, with ANCO providing the workers and the RCAG providing the supervisor. In addition to building the gates, the trainees also attended the local technical college as part-time students. The enterprise resulted in the production of 17 sets of gates for the Royal and 6 sets for the Naas branch of the Grand Canal. The RCAG and the Dublin branch of the IWIA also set up a workshop to produce new breast gates for the 13th lock and leak slip. The RCAG branches along the length of the canal, who signed on for social employment schemes, became involved in restoration work. The restoration work moved up a gear, with the availability of a workforce whose wages were paid for out of government funds, in addition to the availability of material grants. branches were in a good position to plan and cost the restoration and development programmes. One of the major such programmes using the scheme was undertaken by the Kilcock branch on the 15th level. Having purchased a dragline excavator, they proceeded to dredge Kilcock and Maynooth harbours in addition to a 10-kilometre stretch of canal on the 13th and 14th levels. Branches along the canal using the social employment scheme also embarked on dredging work, the rebuilding of harbours and stonework, cleaning out lock chambers and the construction of new slipways. Also on the 17th level at Enfield, the local branch turned a stretch along the canal into a leisure park with picnic tables, slipway and harbour. This example was later followed by the canal, along the canal, thereby adding to the waterway's amenity value. In 1986, the ownership of the canal was transferred from the rail company CIE to the Office of Public Works, OPW. This heralded in a new stage of restoration. Within a short period of time, the OPW embarked on a programme of dredging in addition to the production and installation of new lock gates. One of the major problems associated with restoring navigation to the Royal, that of the road culverts, was also undertaken and tackled by the OPW. The RCAG social employment schemes continued to operate along the canal during this period. However, they changed tack and became more involved in developing canal-side amenities, projects which were very much encouraged and supported by the OPW. While the OPW concentrated on opening the canal to navigation, the RCAG focused on building up the amenity value of the canal by constructing picnic areas, fishing stands, etc. The RCAG and OPW also worked together on capital projects. On such developments, the social employment schemes provided labour while the OPW provided materials. An example was the building of a new slipway and boat launch area on the 13th level at Maynooth. The RCAG provided the labour, while the OPW supplied concrete, stone, sand and cement. That's the site at the construction in Maynooth. You can see it there on one side, and then it's finalised. And an interesting thing, I don't know whether he's in the room here or not, but John McKeown, the waterways engineer at the time, he was down shoveling concrete with the social employment scheme workers. So that was the level of cooperation we had with the OPW at the time. In 1999, the management and maintenance of Ireland's inland waterways, including the Royal Canal, was transferred to Waterways Ireland. The same level of cooperation that had existed between the OPW and the RCAG prior to the transfer continued, with both parties working together in the ongoing development and restoration. Finally, after all canal culverts were replaced by road bridges, lock gates renewed or repaired, and the canal fully rewatered, the Royal Canal was officially open to navigation in October 2010, 36 years after the RCAG had started its restoration programme. It was also at this stage that the RCAG changed its focus from restoration to promoting the recreational, heritage and educational potential of the waterway. We started highlighting the canal's amenities by conducting a programme of guided walks and talks, which turned out to be and still remains very popular. Our members also organised and run Greenway heritage and fishing festivals along the canal every year. We also encourage and facilitate canoe and kayak groups to use the canal, in addition to promoting them on our website. On the environmental front, our members have placed beehives and bat boxes at secluded locations adjacent to the canal. Unfortunately, this is bone of contention with a lot of people, unfortunately due to problems with low water levels, particularly on the western section, the canal has not experienced the expected resurgence of barge and boating activity, a problem we hope will be resolved in the near future. However, there has been a huge increase in the use of the towpath for walking, jogging, cycling and fishing. For instance, it is quite common to see mothers with baby and buggy jogging along the canal, or people being pushed along in their wheelchairs. One of the canal's unique characteristics is that it takes the scenic route across the country as it winds its way from Dublin to the Shannon. Although causing major problems during its construction stage, this has turned out to be a major bonus for us in the 21st century. Along its length, the canal environment continually changes from urban to rural and back to urban, as it passes through towns, villages, and then back into open countryside. In the urban areas, there is an access to public transport, cafes and restaurants, and along the stretches running through the countryside with tree-lined towpaths, the only sounds heard are those made by nature. The picnic areas, leisure parks and seating put in place by the RCAG along the canal adds to the concept that the Royal Canal is indeed a 145 long linear parkway, which also turns out to be the longest greenway in Ireland. During its 200-year history, some notable events in Irish history, were played out along the canal, traces of which still can be found along its banks. Consequently, we believe it has a potential to offer a wide variety of interest for those who wander along its towpath or glide along its waters. The canal is also part of the European Walking and Cycling Trail System, Eurovelo Route 2, which when completed will provide a dedicated route from the city of Galway in the west of Ireland to Moscow. We're wondering which is going to be the hardest to complete. At the moment it looks like to Galway, from the Shannon to Galway, but that's another story. And so, what of the canal's future? We believe it will go from strength to strength as it continues to be developed and promoted as a first-class amenity with links to walking and cycling trails across Europe. And when we heard this morning at another talk, one of our current projects firmly moves the Royal Canal into the 21st century. It involves the placement of QR NFC tags and Bluetooth transmitters at various points along its length. The tags and transmitters contain information and maps about the canal and its environs and can be accessed by those using the waterway via smartphone, whether walking, cycling, boating or fishing. The project, which is funded in the Longford area by Longford Tourism and supported by Waterways Ireland, is part of our Smart Canal programme. We are also involved in developing and building a Royal Canal Greenway website, which when completed will provide information about facilities such as cafes, restaurants, accommodation, bike hire and canal-related events. So anyone wishing to walk, cycle, boat or fish can plan their activities from the comfort of their home before they set off their adventures along the Royal. In May last year, we celebrated the bicentenary of the Royal Canal's completion to the Shannon, at which President Michael D. Higgins unveiled a plaque in Richmond Harbour. In fact, he told a story then, when he was minister looking after the canal, he was often accused of pouring money into a white elephant when you see the condition of the canal it was at the time. And at the opening, he just made the statement, as he said, look at that beautiful white elephant now. So looking forward, as the Royal Canal moves into its next 100 years, we are confident that this unique waterway will go from strength to strength as we continue working with those who are committed to further develop and promote this wonderful amenity. Before I go, the drawings or pictures there beside the opening were done by school children in Longford. We asked them as part of the bicentenary to do paintings or drawings of what they thought the canal would look like 200 years ago, and that's what they came up with. And we gave first, second and third prizes, and actually President Michael D. Higgins picked out one of his favourites and we gave a prize to that as well. So thank you very much.
Can I ask the speakers just to join me on the stage? We have about 3 or 4 minutes now for questions and answers. Do we have any questions for Rumer? I know Rumer Husensen is under time pressures to get away. So, yeah, Mick?
Rumer, this is a question for you. Do you have a standard for the fittings on a boat that you can hook up your pump outs to, or is it a case of hope?
You mean if there is a standard fitting?
Yes, is there a standard fitting that
Yeah, okay.
that everybody uses, or is it?
Yeah, we have two options. One option is the camlock coupling, which is rather standard. Second, on the hose there is a rubber conus, and this conus you put in the deck connection. So if the size does not matter at that moment, because the conus is enough to build up the pressure or the vacuum to pump out the tank. Yes.
Just one further thing. In Canada, we noticed that they didn't put any infrastructure in. They hired inspectors. They would come on board your boat, put some dye in the toilet, pump the handle or whatever you needed to do, and if you found dye in the water, you were fined. The infrastructure all appeared as a result.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other questions for any of the speakers at this stage?
Just a question for Rumour. How did you arrive at the 3,500 litres per day? Was that a predetermined calculation, or is it just a off-the-shelf solution?
No, it was not an off-the-shelf solution. It was a rough calculation. 30 ships per day was 100 litres of wastewater per day, and then maybe also one of these larger vessels with 500 litres. That was just the idea that would be achievable by 30 in 1 day time. That was an idea.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any others? One over there. Oh, sorry, Roisin. Yeah.
A question for Paula and a question for Matthew. Paula, first of all, water quality in the canals at the moment, is it good enough to try and promote swimming? And can you implement something like a blue flag beach system on the canals?
Well, water quality certainly is good throughout the canals. With the Grand Canal Basin, we're literally trying to just resolve that issue, and we've taken significant steps to do that. But there's every reason why in the future, when we've sorted that and we've moved that pipe from Grand Canal Basin, that we wouldn't look at making that a blue flag marina or something like that, where swimming is definitely encouraged. Along the canals, we don't encourage swimming simply because of safety issues, or whatever, because people have been jumping in and out of locks and all of that. But water quality is still hugely important because of all the, water polo and all of those recreational water events. But definitely, I would see potential to look at blue flag and encouraging a blue flag marina in Grand Canal Basin because we will be purposely encouraging swimming there when we have sorted the water quality.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Thanks. And a question for Matthew. Matthew, since the Royal Canal Amenity Group started, I'm sure there's been huge changes in health and safety and insurances and liabilities. What advice would you give to a group now that's thinking of setting up?
Well, when we started, we'd done things probably we wouldn't get away with now. Certainly as regards health and safety, just looking at some of the pictures there from Maynooth, with machinery and that sort of thing. Also, we went ahead when CIE owned the canal, and we just told them we were going to go ahead with something, and we went ahead with it. We only got the only real cooperation in the restoration of the canal, and where we got a huge boost was when the OPW, Waterways Ireland, took over. And certainly nowadays we would defer to them as regards health and safety and for projects, major projects like that. So.
Sorry, so would that affect the volunteering that you can facilitate now?
Well, the canal is virtually restored. There's only a link into Longford Town which needs to be rewatered, which is one of our, which is still one of our goals. Also, a major item we have ongoing at the moment is to sort out the water for boating. We're extremely anxious to get boating back on the Royal. We believe the more people that use it for walking and cycling or just for leisure pursuits will start asking where are the boats, why are there not more boats? So we believe that the use of the canal will lead to pressure to get the facility up and available for boating.
Thanks, Matthew. I think there might be one further question. I'll take that as the last question, if you don't mind.
I was very pleased to see the proposal for the canal into Glasson presented earlier in the conference, but very disappointed to hear that it was turned down by its impact on a special area of conservation. Could it not be argued from Paula's presentation that you bring a completely new biodiversity into a special area of conservation through a canal? And if we were members of the European Union back in the 17 and 1800s, we would have no canals. So could you not turn the whole thing around and demonstrate the benefits of canals on the environment and what they've brought in?
Yeah, so you're talking about the link into Longford, is it? The rewater?
Well, I'm talking about the proposal to bring a canal into Glasson off the inner lakes.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, that proposal actually was, we were working on that several years ago, and we're not working on that anymore, but precisely because of what you're saying there, because of the fact that of the European site and requirements under the Habitats Directive. I take what you're saying. Absolutely, that was one of, when we were working on that proposal, we were going to push that whole issue about the fact that we were changing wetland into a canal ecosystem, and that we would obviously be trying to make that into a biodiversity-rich ecosystem. But under the terms of the European directive, when you designate a special area conservation, it's specifically for certain types of habitats. And you know, that up around Glasson, that area there was wet grassland identified, which was valuable habitat. So under that directive, it's not possible for you to change that habitat unless you mitigate, you know. But it's just very difficult to provide adequate mitigation in that context. We had looked at that for that canal, the potential of providing mitigation in other areas. And in one sense, we have to accept too that, like in terms of Europe, we're under the average in terms of the number of European sites that we have throughout Scotland. Now, that might sound very strange because, from our perspective, 95% or so of our waterways are actually in European sites, or you know, they happen to be falling within the European sites that are designated throughout the country. So I think it's important for us to recognise that those sites are designated because of their high quality conservation environments. And actually, Ruth Delaney at that time was in agreement maybe with not putting a canal there, but providing maybe some other route or way for us to get people into the town of Glasson. We needed to work with the environment that was there. Most definitely regarding canals, we have huge opportunities to enhance the biodiversity of those systems. For example, for instance, in the Ulster Canal, or a canal that we might be regenerating, we need to ensure that we create biodiverse systems that are good and functional. But yeah, there's in terms of the Royal Canal and the Grand Canal, we have amazing, you know, as I said, even some protected species in those canals, which just indicates just how good, high quality environments they are.
Thanks, Paula. I'll have to draw this session to a close now. There's one pleasant duty for me now to perform, and that is to present each of the speakers with the World Canals Conference Burgie. So, Rumour? Safe trip home. Thanks.